Hi, friends, and welcome. Thanks for joining us on today's program. And speaking of that program, I have a sort of rhetorical question for you. Have you hunted and fished your entire life? Have you been at this long enough to basically believe you've got the general architect? You know how a hunt will work, how a fishing trip will go? Do you believe you at least have the basics figured out? Yeah, me too. At least I did until I went out last spring with my stick pusher trying to find a thunder chicken in the late season. You see, I've done this many times, and I knew that the birds were going to be a little call shy. I figured they'd be a little tougher to get to come in close enough for a bow shot. But what occurred, especially at the end of this trip, well, let's just say that if you think you've got it all figured out, if you've seen it all, stick around. Hey, I'm your host, Kyle Randall. This is my Wilderness Journal, and we're headed out chasing thunder chickens right now.
Put the automatic thunder chicken call in
there. That first morning I was set up on the edge of a green field, back in the brush just a little bit. It was windy, but I'd seen birds here before. And after a few calls, I heard and then saw at least one tom out through the brush. He didn't seem to be responding to the diaphragm call very well, so I switched to a box call, and that definitely captured his attention. At least for a few minutes. He was standing out there staring in, what I call hovering. He seemed to be interested, but he really wasn't committing. He wasn't coming any closer. All I really needed him to do was close the distance about another 20 yards and then get into a spot where I had a clear run at him. A shotgun could go right through this brush and it'd be game over. But my stick pusher needed a clear shooting lane. I didn't want to risk a deflection. I kept calling, and then I saw a whole group of toms. There were at least 4 or 5 more coming along behind that first bird. These appeared to be 2 or 3-year-olds. The tom in front was a much bigger, more dominant bird. But either way, there was a bunch of birds, and they were all headed towards some hens. 3 hens had come out in the high grass, and that was definitely the direction the toms were headed. Still, the dominant birds were out front. I figured if I kept it up, I'd break some of these younger birds off. These were still nice, mature birds, and if one of them, any of them, would come in here a little closer. I did notice that one of the toms had a big notch right in the middle of his fan, perhaps from a close encounter with a coyote or maybe even another hunter. And I also noticed they were responding, they were talking back, and ever so slowly a couple of them, including that bird with the notch in his tail, was working his way in. 15, 18 more yards, that's all I needed. I laid on the call a little heavier. I could see at least one of the dominant toms working his way over to the hens. In fact, a couple of them made it all the way over there. The last thing I wanted was for this whole ball of wax to work its way out of the field. All 3 hens and at least 2 of the toms were working their way off to the west. But 3 or 4 of the other toms were still answering. They were standing out there like they were weighing their options. Should they take the girl they heard behind door number 1, or maybe keep an eye on the gals that were out in the field? All you can do in a situation like this is try to command attention. Try to get the birds to believe that you're the dominant hen, or at the very least you're a love-forlorn girl hung up in the bushes in need of a little tomly help. I figured whatever I was saying to him, I better say it pretty quick, because some of these birds were leaving. Despite my best efforts, several of the toms and all the hens kept right on going out of the field. I laid back into the calls. And I did manage to stop and then turn several of the other toms. I would work them, they'd come a little closer, then they'd head off toward the first couple birds. I'd start working them again, they'd turn again. It was like a tug of war. The battle was joined. What these toms thought they heard versus what they knew they could see. There were other bigger toms already with those other hens. Maybe I was a lost hen. Maybe I was just playing hard to get. That's what I hoped I was telling them at least. Back and forth, this is what it is to hunt turkey in the late season. To work a bird, to try to fool him, to try to get him to come. I threw everything I had at him except my bow, and finally they just turned and walked on out of the field following the other bird. I remember thinking, that's an awful lot of mature birds for one bunch this late in the season. I wasn't particularly surprised that the most dominant toms did follow those hens out. I was a little surprised, though, that I couldn't call in at least one of those 2-year-olds, break one off, and get him to come. That's the bird we usually target in the late season. They're the ones that will most often come to a call, and these guys were having none of it. Still, call shy, henned up, whatever, that's not that surprising. Certainly not as surprising as what we called in the next day. Dave Golden had called and said he had a great spot all scouted out.
This is the extra special magic spot, right? That's
Yes.
what you said.
Nearly guaranteed.
Nearly?
Nearly.
Nearly is not what you said on the phone. You said guaranteed.
Must have broke up.
Broke up.
Reception.
Oh, bad those darn cell phones, I see.
Yeah.
You said guaranteed.
Bad reception.
Yeah. Bad something.
Well, despite being set up in a poor reception area, we did get to calling. And despite the fact that it was hot and humid,
Definitely the mosquito season.
Yeah, it's getting darn warm.
it wasn't too long before we actually had some critters coming.
Look at the deer.
Oh, yeah. Two?
Three.
Hey, there was... Oh, a crow.
Yeah, but I thought I heard a hen before that putting.
Well, I heard that too. That's what perked me up. The deer's looking that way too. Yeah.
No, she's like, what the hell? Where'd that one? Another one came up this way. There's a lot more deer over there than you think there are. There's deer all over the hillside.
Wow. I look like I seen probably 6.
In the end, Dave's semi-guaranteed spot appeared to be a semi-guaranteed deer spot. We did hear a hen or two, but by the end of the day, all we'd managed to call in was a bunch of deer. Calling in a deer on a turkey hunt is no great surprise, but a whole herd of them? And on top of that, I know I heard at least one turkey talking back to me. There was a hen at least somewhere in the middle of that group, but I never did see her. All I saw was deer, and the following morning when we set up, started calling, deer is what we saw again. I was looking at deer, but I could hear at least one tom calling back to me off the roost. And then a couple minutes later, I noticed a hen working right out into a group of deer. I called to her a little bit, hoping to entice her over, hoping the tom I'd heard earlier might be coming along behind her. I did need to be careful, though. If I started spooking the deer, this hen'd most likely leave right along with him. I watched and called softly until this hen worked her way all the way down right out in front of us, right next to the decoy. I still hadn't seen any tom yet, but in my book at least, having a live hen walking around acting as a decoy for you is far better than just having a plastic one sitting there any day. And she hung around out there playing decoy for me for quite some time. At least until the deer all left, and then she turned and walked off with them. I never did see that tom I heard. I think that hen was a little confused. She seemed to prefer the company of deer to other turkeys, at least on that day, and I was pretty certain that was the bird we'd heard talking back from a group of deer just the night before on that farm. For whatever reason, she seemed to be stuck in that herd, and with no big old tom following along, dragging behind the herd, I figured it was time we made a move. Just after sunrise, I was calling to a couple of toms on the edge of a food plot. It was really windy, but they were coming. And they kept coming, right up until they heard something or saw something. I don't know what it was, but they just folded tails and started off out of the field. Even in all this wind, they could definitely hear me. But they definitely weren't coming. I knew those toms out in the field could hear me. They just didn't seem to care. I never did hear a hen see any other birds, but for whatever reason, they just turned and marched right straight out of that field without so much as a goodbye gobble. I don't know what I said to them, but they didn't like it. That could be just the effects of, like I said earlier, being a little call shy. Maybe those birds had been worked a few too many times, but for whatever reason, I needed a different plan. I was running out of time. There were only a few days left, and I still wanted to get my granddaughter Katie out for another run at some birds for herself. So I decided the following day, mostly because it was going to be windy again, but also because I needed some different birds to work, I was going to go trolling. I'd put on my leafy wear and just go spot to spot, hopefully find some birds that were a little bit more cooperative. I'd been hunting for a couple of hours unsuccessfully, and I was actually getting ready to quit when I found my first critter. Just in case you were wondering how squirrels learn to hide on trees, yeah, they learned it from the raccoons. And then, just as I was stepping away from the coons, I heard a gobble. I immediately sat down and started getting ready. I had heard that bird plainly, and all this wind, that meant he was really close, somewheres within eyesight probably. The last thing you want to do when you're trolling is push your luck. You don't want to walk up and spook the bird before you ever get a chance.
I was just getting ready to leave. I called and called this morning. I was literally going to pick up my stuff, go get the truck, and I heard a tom gobbling over there, and I think I heard one gobbling that way. We're going to just give it a try here a little bit, commando. See what happens.
I sat up in front of a big maple tree, and I thought to myself, well, at least it isn't so windy down in the woods here. I did take a couple of quick ranges to make sure I knew how far things were. When you're sitting out in the open and you've got a tom coming at you, the last thing you want to do is start moving around, checking his range or something. I started calling and got a near immediate response. There was a bird off to myself, maybe 100 yards, not very far. I couldn't see him yet, but I could hear him plain as day. I got myself turned and set up to shoot. If this bird decided to come, it wouldn't take him long to get here. I kept calling, and then I heard another bird off to my right. There were at least 2 different toms out here, and they seemed to be about 100 yards out each. And I remember thinking, I'm in the catbird seat. I'm right between 2 toms. One of them, if not both of them, are going to come roaring in here to try and take possession of this hen. And then I heard another tom gobble right straight north. I sat there just listening for a few seconds, and then I heard something walking through the leaves. A tom. He was coming right out alongside of me, just behind me actually, at not 20, 25 yards. I had to turn around to shoot, and when I tried, I scuffed some leaves. But the bird didn't putt and run off. He just sank down. He just squatted to the ground and sat there motionless like he was trying to hide.
He just squatted down right there. He isn't 25 yards. Maybe not even 20. He's right there. If I can get a shot at him. I'm going to try it. There's a little bit of a gap there. There's some little trees in the way. I don't know if something's wrong with him. He's just squatting right there.
I got myself turned the rest of the way around and drew my bow. And all the time I was doing it, I just knew he was going to jump up and go running off putting. But he didn't. He just kept sitting there. I'd made it to full draw, but I still needed a lane to shoot through. There were enough sticks and limbs. I kept leaning and leaning. I thought I was going to fall over.
Got it. Nailed it.
I half walked, half ran over there to get that bird, and I still couldn't believe it. And even though I found I had to do some cleanup on the bird after tagging him because of where my broadhead had hit him, all the way back to the tree, I was still thinking, man, this is unbelievable.
That has got to be one of the toughest, strangest turkey hunts. It's windy, it's hot. I saw a big old tom with some hens and a couple of jakes, and then I saw one other tom, and they wouldn't come and they wouldn't come. I was actually leaving. I'd already left the pop-up. I had already worked my way back. I was going for the truck, to be honest. And I heard this boy gobble, and I heard another tom gobble down there in the food plot. I looked down, I could see him, and he worked off with a hen. And I was just getting ready to go. I could hear something. I turned and looked, and this tom was coming up through the woods. And when he realized how close he was, instead of putting and running like they always do, he just squatted down. I mean, he just tried to hide like a rabbit will do. I never see. Thank you, Lord, for what a blessing. It's a big old bird. Look at this thing. This is a nice tom. Certainly not the biggest tom I ever shot, but a nice adult bird. And to get one in the mosquito season with the weather that it's been, I'll tell you, it is a blessing and a surprise. I'd show you more of them, but my broadhead did a little damage to the front end of him up around his head, and quite frankly, it didn't fit for family, but I am thankful. This is a gift. That's what this is. Every once in a while. And you know, I truly want to thank, while I'm talking about gifts, all the people that helped me. Dave, certainly, and Ellen Hope, and Ryan Hopkins, and Dave Golden, Randy Martini, everybody that gave us permission to hunt this year, all the great property owners. Without that, you know, there's no access to finally get out and get one. Kind of old school, kind of the way I used to do it way back when, just me and a stick and a string. That That is really, like I said, that is a gift. Now, I guess we're going to have to go to Canada. Time to go fishing. I do have one more turkey hunter to get out in the field. Katie Bear, we're not done yet, baby. We're going to get another chance. Bird, I think you're coming to my house. There is a bowl of wild turkey chili and some fry bread in our immediate future.
Friends, if I could say one thing to encourage you on your next hunting trip, it would be simple. Never give up. How about that for a surprise? I have never seen anything like that. I've hunted wild turkeys for a long, long time, more than 20 years, and that is the very first time I have ever had a tom come in that close and then try to squat down and hide like that. I have seen them do it when a more dominant bird challenges them. They'll come and squat down, but I've never seen one squat down in front of a hunter, and I've never seen one just sit there and try to hide. I will tell you, I checked that bird out when I cleaned it. I couldn't find anything wrong with it, no previous wounds or anything. He must have just thought that was the best way to survive. And I have to tell you, it did get me to thinking about previous hunts and what I thought I knew about turkeys. Sometimes you step back a bit, you take the big picture look, and you go, hey, how many birds have I overlooked in the past? How many times have I heard a bird coming, couldn't find it, and then just got up and walked away because I didn't see him right away? Something to think about on your next turkey hunt. And speaking of that next turkey hunt, you can rest assured come next season, I'll be sitting a little longer, looking a little closer, especially when I hear a bird that I can't see. These are the things, my friends, that I'm talking about when I tell you every hunt and every situation is different. They all have their own challenges. And everything is always changing in the great outdoors. That's part of what makes it so much fun. Hey, I hope we see you out there trying to take up that challenge. Grab a stick and a string, go out there trolling for toms in the late season. It's a fun and exciting way to hunt, and I hope I see you out there doing it. I hope you're dragging in a big old buster of your own, and if you are, well, you know we're going to stop and share that cup and a fire. And if I don't see you out there, friends, well, then I'll wait for you right back here so we can share another adventure from my Wilderness Journal.